Yes. Yes.
C'est le 2.
Yes. If you give your speech, my colleague will film. Yes.
Ça va commencer à siffler.
Ça siffle pas. Laisse-moi l'ouvert. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, test, test, test. Laisse-moi tous les deux ouverts comme ça. Parce que c'est
une
bon.
bonne idée.
Hein?
C'est pas une bonne idée.
Non, pourquoi?
Parce qu'avec ça, tu as déjà 2 micros ouverts. S'il y a encore un troisième, il va couper une de ce micro. Donc,
ah, mais je perds chaque fois que j'ouvre un micro, ça va siffler. Et ça va, tu sais plus que moi. Hein?
Bah oui.
Je vais pas te discuter. Hein? Pas du tout, hein, Jos. Pas du tout. Hein?
Ok.
Un, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, test. Ça, c'est bon. Le micro s'enfile. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. C'est trop bas. Ah. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Maintenant, c'est bon. Maintenant, c'est bon, ça coche pas. Un, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, test, 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 test. C'est qui aura le son du micro? Qui est les...
Monsieur Edbury.
Monsieur est là.
Le monsieur
Oh là là.
Test.
Ah, le micro.
Voilà. Non, ça marche, mais c'est pas bien de venir avec ces micros. Celle-là, pas le faire surtout.
Bah, je vais laisser.
Test.
Plutôt parce que vraiment ça marche pas trop bien cette installation, c'est trop petit pour ça y a ouf. Et mais bon là ça devrait aller. Mais si vous vous approchez pas trop, que ça peut accrocher tous les deux, faire là, parce qu'il y a deux haut-parleurs orientés là comme ça.
Mais est-ce qu'on a besoin du micro? Est-ce qu'on a tous. Ok.
Donc ma collègue qui arrive, Yvonne Bruy-Pouloise, va s'occuper du micro.
Ok, mais est-ce qu'on a besoin, parce qu'on a tous le micro sur la table?
Ben, peut-être quand même, parce qu'il y a quand même des gens qui seront assis derrière.
Ah oui, derrière.
Et surtout
Ok.
par rapport aux organisations de société civile, ils ne sont pas dans l'hémicycle. Donc ça veut dire que
D'accord.
je m'attends à ce qu'eux posent des questions.
Oui.
Et si eux posent des questions, ils seront en dehors. Donc
Ok.
c'est plutôt d'appoint, quoi. Si les gens ont un micro, ils utilisent un
Ok, je
micro.
Ok.
Ils n'ont pas le micro. Très important qu'ils mettent le micro. S'ils ne mettent pas le micro,
Ok.
chaque fois rappeler, ça ne
Ouais,
passe pas en live stream. Hein.
D'accord.
Donc c'est très très important. Peut-être
De
aussi
pousser-
dire house rules au début du meeting. C'est que vu qu'on est en live stream et qu'on veut quand même que tout le monde puisse suivre ce qui se dit, qu'il faut systématiquement mettre le micro.
D'accord.
Oui. You will be responsible for the mic in the panel debate, which is at the end. So I would suggest that as of 10 minutes before or 15 minutes before the panel debate, you come in the room. Here's your mic. Maybe you want to check it?
Yeah.
Does it work? So wait, let's. And Ed will tell you who to give the mic to. Okay. You manage it.
Yeah, I think it's more if there are questions from outside, because otherwise they've got the microphones, but people behind.
Comment mettre le micro?
Il faut parler tout simplement.
Il est allumé là?
Oui, oui. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, test. Voilà, ça marche. Il faut approcher quand même un peu là comme ça. Vous êtes déjà en web streaming? Ça va. Voilà, approchez un peu là comme ça, pas trop loin parce que sinon c'est un micro précision. Et surtout, s'il vous plaît, ne pas approcher là. Ah, no French. You can close, not, close to this microphone.
Okay.
This one, just this.
How do you switch it off?
Here, just here.
Now you switch it off. You will
Very
be.
little.
Nou, ik heb hier een paar weken geleden gezeten en toen dacht ik, nou is het niet vandaag.
Dit even de foto's af. Oh, nee. We moeten allemaal een beetje erbij
Ja. Ja, en die vindt het binnenkomen. Kijk, dat is maar één ingang hebben. Ja. Nou, nee, dat niet. Nee, ja, we hebben een verhaal. Ja, straks discussie, ja,
So can I ask everyone to take their seats now, and then we can make a start? So thanks very much, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, and welcome to this high-level seminar on animal welfare in the European Union. First of all, I'd like to say a big thanks to Eurogroup for Animals for organising this event. It's so nice to see so many people here for it. It's also hosted by the Parliament's Intergroup for the Welfare and Conservation of Animals. That's a group in the Parliament supported by 110 MEPs. I'd also like to welcome those who are watching on the internet. We're live streamed, so welcome to all those viewers watching on their screens at home or at work. So for that reason, I'd like to ask everyone who's going to speak to be using their microphone, and for the speakers to come up here to the podium so that you can be seen on the live stream. We're also on Twitter. We have the hashtag Act for Animals EU, so people can get involved in the debate there and also send in their questions. There will be some time after the panels for question and answer session. A quick introduction to myself. I'm a journalist here, freelance journalist based in Brussels, following agriculture, food, trade and environment policy, everything that's affecting farmers on the ground. Now, our agenda today, we have a number of high-level speakers. A warm welcome to our ministers, Minister Van Dam from the Netherlands and Minister Bucht from Sweden. So it shows the importance that animal welfare has at the political level, as well as at the level of our citizens. A short background to the event. There's been a joint declaration on animal welfare initiated by the German, Danish and Dutch agriculture ministers. That was in December 2014, later joined by the Swedish minister. So we're going to hear, I'm sure, of some of their recommendations, which included better enforcement of current rules, an extension of rules to cover some other species, and the creation of an EU platform on animal welfare with stakeholders. So it's a very important time for this debate. We're looking ahead now to the next EU animal welfare strategy, 2016 to 2020. So here's just a bit of the background. We have lots of speakers. I'm going to be very strict with timing, so if you could keep to your timing, otherwise you're going to have to be cut off. All speakers, I'd invite them to come to the podium. So that's it from me. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for a welcome. That's MEP Janusz Wojciechowski. He's a Polish member of the European Parliament's ECR group. He's also president of the Animal Welfare Intergroup, vice chairman of the Agriculture Committee. Welfare has always been one of his top priorities. He's been a rapporteur for a number of reports: protection of animals during transport, protection of animals at slaughter, the EU's Animal Health Strategy 2007 to 2013. So Mr. Wojciechowski, I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Bray. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a great pleasure for me to welcome all distinguished guests. First of all, I'd like to welcome our special guests. On behalf, I welcome our guests on behalf of the Animal Welfare Intergroup, or Animal Welfare Eurogroup, the same. First of all, our ministers, Mr. Erik Bucht, Swedish Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Ben Weitz, Flemish Minister for Mobility, Public Works, Tourism and Animal Welfare, and Mr. Martin Van Dam, Dutch Minister for Agriculture. Welcome to all representatives of European Commission, my colleague members of the European Parliament and other distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, the Animal Welfare Intergroup is one of the most successful intergroups in the European Parliament. This term of the Parliament, the group is convening 110 cross-political and cross-country members, which shows that the dedication and passion to animals is binding politicians from all backgrounds. The success of the intergroup has recently resulted in 2 adopted resolutions on a new ambitious animal welfare strategy 2016-2020, as well as the harmonization and identification of and registration standards of pets. Both resolutions were adopted with overwhelming support of the whole European Parliament. The activity of intergroup is, among others, this is the strong contribution to improve our reports which are adopted in the Parliament. Mr. Bray told about the reports about animal health strategy, animal transport, and other reports. It is a very big contribution, members of the animal welfare intergroup, to give amendments to improve this acts of the Parliament. The intergroup welcomed the initiatives from the Dutch, Danish, German and Swedish ministers to improve animal welfare and supports the declaration of Wood, including the position paper on transportation of livestock, declaration of Copenhagen, where a revision of the pig directive was proposed, at the latest declaration on a horizontal EU animal welfare platform. One of forum activity of intergroup is their meetings with representatives of the European Commission. Last week we had very effective, in my opinion, meetings with Commissioner Andriukaitis. Before we had meeting with Commissioner Hogan. Intergroup is very active in its work. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your presence here, for your answer for our invitation. This meeting is very important. I like to finish my short speech using the sentence, my favorite sentence of Mahatma Gandhi, said that level of civilization and its moral progress can be judged how its animals are treated. And we would like together to give good evidence of a level of our European civilization. Thank you very much, and let me apologize that just after my welcoming speech I have to leave this meeting, because today there is a public hearing in Budgetary Control Committee. I am candidate to the European Court of Auditors. This is the reason that I have to be in this meeting. Thank you again. I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
So thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Thanks very much, MEP Wojciechowski. I'd now like to invite to the floor Reineke Hameliers, who is the Director of Eurogroup for Animals, the organizer of the event. Eurogroup for Animals is the pan-European organization for animal advocacy, unites the voices of the leading national and international animal welfare organizations. Its work is supported by over 10 million citizens, aims to improve the lives of animals through advocacy and campaigns, 49 members in 29 countries. So Reineke is going to tell us a little more about why it's so important the objectives of the member state declarations are fulfilled. So Reineke, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome on this sunny day in Brussels. Yes, welcome, honored guests from the European Commission, member states, members of the European Parliament, other guests, and of course, ministers of Agriculture, Martijn van Dam, the Swedish Minister of Rural Affairs, Sven-Erik Bucht, welcome, Flemish Minister for Animal Welfare, and a lot more I know, but I stick to animal welfare this morning, Ben Weitz, And I would also like to welcome all the citizens, policymakers and representatives from NGOs, Eurogroups for Animals members who are following us through the live stream. And don't forget to use our hashtag #EUActForAnimals. And feel free also for the citizens who are following us online to ask your questions, because at the end we will select 3 questions that will be answered by the speakers here this morning. Today's meeting is the direct result of the strong commitment by several national governments to take seriously their citizens' desire to respect animal welfare. And Eurogroup for Animals applauds the ministers for showing such political and moral leadership. The Vught and Copenhagen Declaration, including the position paper on transport, clearly show which animal issues are at stake in Europe at the moment, but also how committed these member states are in trying to resolve them. And the challenge we face now is to ensure that these declarations, but moreover the underlying push for change, will be taken seriously throughout the EU. And the picture on the left on the slide shows me releasing an owl that had just recovered from an injury, which is one of the numerous things Eurogroups for Animals members do. And the owl took off close between the border, close to the border between the Netherlands and Belgium, and almost instantly crossed that border without even knowing it. And I think this beautifully illustrates the cross-border nature of many aspects regarding the keeping, the trade and the well-being of animals in Europe. So please bear with me in my attempt to explain why the Eurogroup for Animals network believes EU leadership and strong leadership on animal welfare is indispensable. Europe is in turmoil and needs relatable, constructive messages. So here is one. The Eurobarometer 2006 indicated that 8 out of 10 European citizens see animal welfare as a matter of great importance, and that almost 80% of the Europeans believe that farm animal welfare standards should be improved. And based on the work of our 49 members, supported by tens of millions of European citizens, we have clear signs that the new Eurobarometer on animal welfare will show that it has become even more important to European citizens. And we will expect this new Eurobarometer very soon. In times of growing alienation and distrust with the EU, we believe that this strong support for animal welfare can be harnessed by the European institutions to connect with individual citizens and to show them that Europe can drive positive change. Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans alluded to this when he noted in his laureate speech, and I quote, "It is the Commission's role to bring the EU closer to its citizens and listen to their ideas, hopes and anxieties, to see how it can help citizens to find common answers to common problems. The Commission must not be seen as stuck inside the Brussels bubble. It must show that citizens' priorities are Commission priorities." Since animal welfare is clearly a priority to EU citizens and the Member States' initiatives have shown that it's also on the national agenda, we believe there is every reason for the European institutions to take up the issue and to use it to connect with Europeans. In the past, the EU has proven that indeed it is able to address citizens' concerns by passing 28 legislative acts that have led to higher animal welfare standards since 1974. And this culminated in the crucial acknowledgement of animals as sentient beings in the Lisbon Treaty, as well as the stipulation of the 5 freedoms in the Farming Directive. And it shows that Europe truly had the ambition, the public support, but also the ability to establish the highest animal welfare standards in the world. So I think that we can rightfully symbolize this leadership position with a lion as king of the animals. So yes, a lot of good results have been accomplished. However, in the last 6 years, progress has slowed to a trickle or stopped altogether. In some cases, prior achievements were even reversed. And we observe 3 worrying trends. First of all, implementation and enforcement of existing legislation are still inadequate in large parts of the EU. Secondly, existing animal welfare legislation is falling short of its objectives, failing to incorporate new scientific findings as well as ethical concerns from citizens, and no significant progress has been made in updating it. And finally, in an ever-globalizing world, the EU is facing increased pressures to improve competitiveness. And at times, this is at odds with, for example, the protection of local farmers, but also with European values such as animal welfare. And as a result, the effectiveness of existing legislation is under huge pressure as international trade proliferates. And although we all like kittens, when it comes to leadership, I would prefer to have the EU stay a lion. So, what does the stagnation of animal welfare mean? What does it look like in practice? How are the lives of animals of flesh and blood and local communities willing to take animal welfare seriously? How are they impacted? Let me give you some examples. EU legislation prohibits the appalling practice of tail docking of pigs since 1994. But after more than 20 years, the vast majority of member states are not in compliance with this provision. And on top of this, extremely painful surgical castration is still carried out on about 83 million piglets per year. And we are really facing a pig welfare crisis. But also, 37 million cattle, sheep, pigs, goats and horses are transported over long distances in horrible conditions each year, as are 1 billion chicks and hens that are sent to slaughter. And once arrived at the slaughterhouse, inadequate stunning methods of pigs and poultry are causing immense suffering. A large number of species that require protection from European law are left by the wayside, including dairy cows, farmed fish, rabbits, geese and ducks. We also observe the illegal trade of pets and unregulated trade of exotic animals that is booming, fueled by a lack of cross-border traceability and the absence of common rules on the types of animals that can be kept. And last but not least, EU legislation requires to at least minimize suffering of animals within research projects. But still, more than 500,000 of animals continue to suffer from experiments classified as being severe. And I could go on and on, but I think that you get the picture. All these examples illustrate that animals, whether it is in intensive farming, research, transport, trade or keeping, are systematically prevented from displaying their natural behaviors. Thus, disregarding this very important principle in the Lisbon Treaty of sentience, but also disrespecting the citizens' call to protect animals. And before I will turn to future perspectives, one could ask, why is it legitimate for the European Commission to take action? Why can't animal welfare be left to the national and regional authorities? As you will recognize, animal welfare is not an isolated topic. It's not a standalone issue, but it's intrinsically connected with EU key competencies. And there are at least 3 I would like to highlight that directly impact animal welfare.
And inaction in these areas would fly in the face of the values as laid down in Article 13 of the treaty. Firstly, there is a clear link between the common agriculture policy and animal welfare. And 40% of the gap. And this provides an ultimate opportunity also to invest in more sustainable and higher welfare farming practices. But at the moment, this goes unused. Then secondly, the current lack of harmonized welfare standards and practices cause a severe distortion of the internal market. And we see that, for example, when it comes to dairy farming. And finally, the cross-border nature of today's agriculture, but also the trade in animals, presents severe risks to human and animal health. And as for the principle of subsidiarity, this mainly entails that the European Commission can only take action where initiatives of the individual countries are insufficient. But given the cross-border and multifaceted nature of the challenges we are facing, it's crystal clear that better animal welfare requires dedicated legislative action from the European Commission. And although we are worried about the lack of initiative within the EU in the last 7 years, we do see perspectives, mainly created by the member state initiatives as we are witnessing today. And therefore, we were very pleased to see that the objectives in the Vught and Copenhagen Declaration attempt to tackle the numerous animal welfare challenges as just outlined in my presentation. For example, they call for restrictions on the journey times of transport, for the phasing out of non-therapeutic mutilations, because we want to see pigs with tails again. They call for specific EU legislation for all farm and companion animals, including for those species currently unprotected, for better information to consumers, and finally for setting animal welfare conditions in trade agreements to ensure that imported animal products will comply with our legislation. And in addition, the Ministerial Alliance has shown clear support for the delivery of the European Declaration to phase out surgical castration of piglets, as well as to substantially improve the Pigs Directive. And these are all crucial, yet wholly reasonable ambitions that should be addressed in a new European Animal Welfare Strategy 2016-2020, as to serve as a framework to deliver results for animals in the current political term. And given the urgency of the issues the EU is facing, the development of this strategy should start as soon as possible, also addressing the recently adopted Parliament's resolution on this matter. To finish off, the European project is under intense scrutiny. We all know that. Its future is in the spotlight, and its foundations are being tested by a number of concurrent crises. And one could easily say in this context that animal welfare should be seen as a peripheral issue, or perhaps even as a luxury. This would be a grave mistake. On the contrary, animal welfare provides the EU with a means to connect with individual citizens and to demonstrate the true value of European solutions by doing something that Europeans really want: a good life for animals in Europe, in accordance with the notion that all sentient beings deserve to be treated decently. And it's our strong conviction that if the European Commission wants to bring the EU closer to its citizens, it could find no better project than to start working on animal welfare today, following the excellent example set by the member states being present here today. Thanks for your attention.
Well, thanks very much, Reineke. We now have a very good overview of all the challenges and all the issues that we face on the issue. I'd now like to welcome to the floor our first Minister who's going to speak. That's Minister Martin van Dam, Dutch Minister for Agriculture. He's also chairing the EU Agriculture Councils at the moment as the holders of the Dutch presidency of the European Union. And Minister van Dam is going to be addressing the issue of a new EU animal welfare strategy from 2016 to 2020. So Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It's good to be here. After yesterday, we had a long session in the Agricultural Council. But today, fortunately, I'm allowed to speak as a Dutch minister and not as president of the council, which gives me a little bit more space, of course, to share my opinions with you and the opinions of the Dutch government, and I don't have to share the opinions of 28 member states. That's much easier. For a long time, farming and animal husbandry were simple affairs. Our ancestors produced food on a small scale and enjoyed a simple diet. In recent decades, however, this has changed. Technological innovation and changing consumer demands have given birth to a large-scale agro-food industry. This has brought us many good things like prosperity, health and choice, but while we can be grateful for these benefits, we need to face the fact that the current food system is not future-proof. In 3 decades, we will have to feed 9 or 10 billion people worldwide, and current food production practices are unsustainable. They are exhausting our natural resources and damaging our ecosystems. To make a real and lasting change, we need to start at the source, agriculture. We need to shift from a supply-oriented system to a demand-led one. Specifically, the demands of consumers and society as a whole. And their demands, especially in our part of the world, are pretty clear. We want more safety, we want more transparency, and we want a better treatment of animals. To achieve this, we need a transition to a more innovative and sustainable production system. One that is based on the latest scientific insights. One that produces higher quality food. One that conserves nature. And of course, one that treats animals well. Cows, pigs and chickens are not production units, they are sentient beings. They have a right to more care and compassion. If I look at livestock production, I feel there is considerable room for improvement. Different feed, slower growth, more space, and sustainability and welfare as an integral part of production. The pig sector and calf sector specifically are already restructuring in the Netherlands and improving with this in mind. All of this is the joint responsibility of farmers, food producers and animal welfare organizations. And for their part, policymakers can encourage change by stimulating innovation, setting standards and ensuring that regulations are enforced. Today's meeting brings together key stakeholders in this important debate, and I'm very grateful that the Eurogroup and the EP Intergroup have made the effort to organize it. Thank you very much for it. Because 100 years ago, pretty much of all our food was produced locally by individuals that you probably knew by name. Today, most food is produced across complex chains that span various industries and countries. The current system tends to value efficiency more than animal welfare. In the Netherlands, I am pleased with what the agro-food industry has done to improve on this. I think some 65% of pigs are already not castrated anymore, and we are aiming to fully phase out this practice. Pregnant sows are now housed in groups for 4 days after insemination. And we have introduced innovative animal husbandry approaches for chickens and cows. And I'm also very pleased with the success of the Better Life certification, as we know in the Netherlands, of the Dutch Society for the Protection of Animals. It's a qualification system with stars, and they're printed on the package of meat products and eggs, and they show how well animals have been treated, allowing consumers to make a conscious decision as to what they are buying. Seeing how this meets a need that government regulations had failed to address. Supermarkets are now committing to phasing out within a few years meat that is uncertified. So things are gradually improving in the Netherlands. Now, in order to improve animal welfare across the whole of Europe, to create a level playing field and to facilitate the marketing of animal products, we need to have a new animal welfare strategy on an EU level. The previous one has achieved some good results. For example, the ban on traditional battery cages that has been enforced and audited, and there's compulsory group housing of pregnant sows. A number of EU member states has managed to apply the directive banning traditional cages on time. Others, however, have not, which shows we need to harmonize the implementation and the enforcement of policies. Looking at the previous strategy, I also noticed that several goals and actions are still outstanding, such as a study on the welfare of fish during transport and guidelines on the protection of animals at the time of killing. I really encourage the European Commission to complete all outstanding actions as soon as possible and to work on a new strategy, because we need one to guide us in the coming years, which is why, I think like many of you, I've been wondering what a new strategy should look like. Allow me to share 5 suggestions with you, which are based on the Declaration of Vught that has been signed by Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands in 2014 and which was joined by Sweden last year. First, legislation and regulation should conform to the latest scientific insights, technological innovations and socio-economic trends. For example, it has become easier to measure animal welfare using clear animal-based indicators, such as the percentage of lame animals. And the European Food Safety Authority has said that the time limit for the transport of horses for slaughter should be decreased. In addition, the Scientific Committee on Animal Health and Animal Welfare indicated in 2002 that many animal species and categories should have a considerable resting period after traveling no more than 8 hours. I think that the EU transport regulation should be improved and updated based on such insights. In the case of transports, it may be time to ask ourselves whether we should continue to allow transports lasting more than 8 hours to exist. I would therefore like to request the European Commission to make a socio-economic impact analysis on capping transport time for slaughter animals to 8 hours. The third suggestion, this was the second, the third suggestion is to minimize mutilating animals. For example, by trimming the beaks of chickens and castrating pigs and docking their tails. This topic resonates widely with consumers and other stakeholders because it is cruel to animals, which is why the Netherlands aims to phase out surgical castrations of piglets by 2018, and why the Commission's support for the Brussels Declaration on alternatives to surgical castration continues to be needed. In addition, I would like to reiterate the request to the Commission to explore possibilities for a new comprehensive legislative framework for animal welfare. Fourth, I would welcome EU legislation for animal species and categories currently not covered by specific legislation. This way there can be clarity around, say, housing requirements and space allowances for turkeys and rabbits. The more species we can protect, the fairer and more sustainable our food production will become. Fifth, there's a need for structural EU-wide cooperation, specifically an EU platform for animal welfare. This could become a center for networking, sharing research and exchanging best practices, also around the application of the existing regulations. The idea for such a platform has been discussed in not the last council but the one before, the first council during our presidency, and it has received broad support. I feel the Commission should quickly come up with a proposal now. My sixth and final suggestion relates not to the EU strategy itself, but to something that influences its impact. Europe relies, in part, on imports from outside of the EU, from places where animal welfare standards are lower than our own. We need to make sure that trade agreements do not hamper our efforts to improve the welfare of animals by further opening our markets to products from animals that have been kept below our EU standards. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us here, I'm sure, are passionate about improving the welfare of animals. Our efforts have yielded results, but we all know a lot more remains to be done. I would like us to create a world in which animals receive compassionate treatment, in which the EU continues to uphold the highest animal welfare standards, and in which our food is healthy, delicious, safe and honest. So I would like us to commit to a food production system that by 2030 at the latest offers animals a substantially better life, with more space in which to live in a natural way, with the ability to go outside, and with respect for their physical integrity. The previous EU strategy has contributed towards this goal, and I would like a next strategy to take us further. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion we'll have later on. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Minister Van Dam. Very passionate speech in favour of improving our current standards. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of the issues that you raised in the question and answer session. So I'm now going to invite to the floor our next Minister, Minister Sven-Erik Bucht from Sweden. He's the Swedish Minister for Rural Affairs. He's therefore responsible for all issues related to rural affairs. That includes regional growth, agriculture, forestry and fisheries. Animal welfare has of course been a priority of the Swedish government. And he's been working together, as we've heard, with colleagues from Netherlands, Denmark and Germany, resulting in several important initiatives. And Mr. Bucht is going to be speaking in particular about pig welfare. And he will be speaking in Swedish, I understand, so you have interpretation.
Så, tack så mycket.
Thank you very much indeed, and a very good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure to be able to be here and talk to you about what you can see up here on the picture. Healthy pigs and pigs with their tails intact. And this is something that we're rather good at in Sweden. The pig tail has become a very important symbol for Swedish consumers and important factors for success when it comes to doing well with this kind of rearing is healthy animals, enough space, enough straw for them to keep occupied. And this has been a really important issue for the Swedish government, animal protection, and that is made clear in our regulations, for instance. Examples on far-reaching issues in Swedish rules are, for example, a ban on tail docking, rules on freedom of movement for all pigs, and rules on anesthesia and analgesia when it comes to surgical castration. We have a very strong tradition of high levels of animal welfare, and this is something that we're very proud of in Sweden and that we will continue to champion. And this is very important, not just because of the link between high levels of animal protection and high levels of animal health and a low use of antibiotics. I would very much like to uphold the Swedish model because it's got a close cooperation between local authorities and businesses when it comes to prevention work for animal health and animal welfare. And together we've managed to build a system where we have managed to minimize the use of antibiotics. And this has meant that in Sweden we have the lowest level of antibiotic use for animals within the European Union. Antimicrobial resistance is another priority issue for the Swedish government, and the Commission's proposal for a new regulation on veterinary medicine is a golden opportunity to introduce measures that we will be able to curb antimicrobial resistance developments. And I really hope that there will be a ban introduced on the routine prophylactic use of antibiotics. When it comes to animal protection issues within the European Union, I think it's absolutely vital for us all to work together. Animal protection within the European Union has to be strengthened and shored up, and we have to work on a united front using all of the tools available to us. Now, you're probably aware of our ongoing cooperation with Denmark, the Netherlands and Germany. And in April last year, I, along with my colleagues, signed a declaration which seeks to improve animal protection levels in pig rearing in the European Union. Now, the declaration, amongst other things, included an appeal to the Commission to take further firm steps to reduce tail docking and to make sure that sows and gilts can be housed in groups for longer than today. And also, from 2018, we'd like to see a requirement on anesthesia and analgesia practices when it comes to surgical castration of piglets. We have also recently submitted a proposal for the creation of an animal protection platform in the European Union, which we think will help animal protection overall. I'd also like to underline the fact that I fully support the appeal from the Dutch Minister, Mr. Van Dam, that the Commission should actually carry out an impact assessment on the limiting of slaughter transport to 8 hours, because long journey times for livestock is one of the key issues when it comes to animal protection. Now, animal protection is also about compliance with the rules. It's absolutely vital, both for the animals and for competitiveness, that everybody follows the rules that are in place. Primary production is a key plank of food production, but many companies now are really facing major challenges. And a healthy primary production is actually very important, not just because it enables tasty food to get onto our tables and allows for employment in rural areas, but a modern and well-functioning animal husbandry where animals are well gives us food which can have less of an impact on the environment and also reduce antimicrobial resistance. And this is absolutely vital for the future. For sustainable, high-quality animal husbandry, it's very important that the added value of production actually covers the costs for the companies, their outgoings. And that's why consumer choice is vital, or rather consumers is very important here. So businesses and retailers have to make it easier for consumers to choose products that are produced with very high standards. I don't think the pig-rearing future in the European Union is about competing on a price level with countries where they have much lower production costs than we do. No, instead, I think this is where animal welfare really comes into play. I also think that the future for pig rearing in Europe is really about focusing on good animal welfare, prevention work in terms of animal health, and innovative solutions, because then we can create the right conditions for a sustainable food production system in the future as well. And I'd like to finish off by once again stressing the fact that it's very important for us to work together and cooperate on these issues. Our door is always open. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Bucht. Some good examples of how of good practice, so with low antibiotic use, for example. I'm sure, again, we're going to come back to this issue probably later on. I'd now like to introduce our next minister, that's Ben Waits. I'm going to have a go at your full title, Mr. Waits. I think you're the Flemish Minister for Mobility, Public Works, Tourism and Animal Welfare. And that's important, as I think you're the only minister in Europe to have a specific animal welfare portfolio in terms of your title and your budget. Now, since you took office in July 2014, you've undertaken a number of important steps to improve animal welfare in the region, including such as combating animal slaughter without stunning. But here you're going to be talking about the protection of pets across Europe. This is a very important issue, particularly as there's a legal trade in pets such as puppies, for example. And Eurogroup for Animals has been running a Protect Our Pets campaign supported in Parliament by German MEP Renate Sommer, who's leading that. So I'd now like Mr. Waits, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues, members of the European Parliament, and all associated with the cause for animal welfare. My name is Ben Waits. I'm the Flemish Minister of Animal Welfare in Belgium. It's somehow, it might be a bit confusing. It's a funny country. I could explain all the ins and outs of our complicated political system, and the division of competence take far more than 10 minutes. And we have more important issues to discuss. Animal welfare in Belgium is the competence of the regions, and so that's why I'm here as a minister of the largest region state within Belgium. There was a time, and not that long ago, when the European Union started to look like the standard bearer for animal welfare across the continent. I refer to the Lisbon Treaty that recognized animals explicitly as sentient beings, beings that are capable of feelings of pleasure and pain. In more recent years, however, the European Union sadly has dropped the ball. Ambitions were scaled back to the bare minimum. When valuable apparatus, when they left, they were not replaced. Existing regulations were not even enforced. For example, before I took office, I had a major issue concerning the European ban on ritual slaughter outside licensed slaughterhouses. It was blatantly passed by the Belgian government. And in fact, when government employees contacted the European Commission concerning that issue, their questions went even ignored. Fortunately, Flanders now enforces the official ban on slaughter without stunning outside slaughterhouses, even during the yearly Islamic feast of the sacrifices. But, in fact, not thanks to the European Union, where they seemingly forgot about animal welfare. We see less, but we need more European cooperation on animal welfare. We have to work towards common standards and unified solutions. EU-wide problems need common solutions while still respecting the member states' autonomy. And when we're in a phase where the European construction is under pressure, in such circumstances, I don't understand why animal welfare isn't picked up as a domain of European excellence. Everybody knows that the European citizens, the European public opinion, are not only ready, they are demanding more political attention for animal welfare. Is agriculture, as stated by Minister Bucht very well, is agriculture a problem concerning that? Is animal welfare a threat to agriculture? Not even close, I think. I think it could be an asset, even. Animal welfare could be an asset for European agriculture. Wouldn't it be great if that flag, if that European label would be the label of excellence in the domain of animal welfare, so that we know whenever you see the European label, you know that is made in Europe means made with great attention for animal welfare, with a maximum of guarantees concerning animal welfare. The need for an international approach is clear in the case of, for example, pet trade as well. The traffic of pet animals is in fact not bound by national borders. Puppy farms in Eastern Europe produce dogs for buyers here in Belgium. And you know, the European consumers, what they all want, they want such a very nice, fluffy puppy. They want to cuddle and they want it to be very young. So puppy farms in Eastern Europe produce dogs for buyers here in Belgium. Unfortunately, many of those puppy farms house animals in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions without veterinary care, food or water. Puppy farm dogs do not receive adequate attention, exercise or basic grooming. Due to these conditions, puppies bred in these farms often suffer from health and or social problems. Only if the nations of Europe join forces, we can efficiently root out all these horrifying malpractices. To its credit, the European Commission took steps to counter the hazards of transnational pet trade. The younger the animal, the higher the risk of illness due to long travel. But the new European legislation concerning rabies raised the minimal age, which meant real progress regarding animal welfare. However, the Commission also missed an opportunity, missed some important opportunities to close all loopholes. The biggest loophole, for example, is the lack of adequate tools for age determination. Today it's very easy to falsify the age of a young dog, and it's very difficult to verify the real age. In case of doubt, we lack the tools to check the age claims of pet traders. The silver bullet, the most simple solution, is a European registration system, European standards. By standardizing the national rules for the identification of an animal, and by creating the framework for national databases that allow for exchanging information, we can enhance the traceability of traded animals, strengthen the welfare of all animals, and better protect the interest of animal owners as well. The registration of animals needs to be obligatory. The system only works when it encompasses all animals. Not so long ago, the European Parliament passed a very interesting resolution calling on the Commission to compel the Member States to introduce national databases for the registration of all pet animals. Competent authorities and veterinarians would have access to all databases via a special European platform. I believe the Dutch presidency of the European Council can play a pivotal role in convincing the Commission to hear and answer the call of the European Parliament. By doing so, we would deliver a great blow to the illegal pet trade. By the way, I'm happy to see that some Member States already start to organize a national registration system. Not only last week, Germany decided to set up federal identification and registration for cats and dogs a week ago, so in election time, so well done Germany. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, to improve the European regulatory framework to avoid all misuse. For example, today it is perfectly possible to replace a European pet passport. This means that crucial vaccination information is lost and consumers are often deceived. Belgium has prohibited the replacement of a pet passport, but in other European member states that is not the case. And the rules are much more flexible. This has to end if we truly want to reduce the scope for illegal trade. Minister Van Dam talked also about the new platform of countries. It's very interesting, countries to further the cause of animals in Europe. Flanders, Belgium, in fact, because I'm representing Belgium and the 3 competent regions of Belgium, we want to participate. If you would like us to join, we're very willing to join that platform. So, and that's why I'm not a pessimist. Although the European Commission has stepped down or stepped back a bit from animal welfare, the issue remains alive and kicking among countless European countries in European public opinion, and more just than a few politicians. And I focused on the pet trade today, but besides that important issue, I think many more challenges can be tackled. For example, foie gras comes to mind. Foie gras, you know, the luxury food product is too often the result of force feeding of geese. And in fact, Europe is partially responsible for that. Because the European norm for the official label of foie gras asks for a crazy obese liver. So the standard is that high that you even influence the fact of the force feeding of geese. Today it is almost impossible to reach the unrealistic standard of the European Union without force feeding. Unfortunately, this standard also impairs research for more animal-friendly production procedures. So if we lower the bar, it would become possible to get the label of foie gras without so much animal suffering. And foie gras could become foie fair, for example. There are many more issues, but also many more speakers here today. So let me conclude my remarks with a word of gratitude. Thank you for advancing the interest of animals. Thank you for the Dutch presidency and that domain. Especially here in the European Parliament, many initiatives are being taken, and keep challenging the European Commission on that issue so that Europe may become once again the proud and powerful standard bearer for animal welfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Waits. You raised some important issues of traceability, registration systems, and working together at EU level to ensure that we've got harmonised standards. I'd now like, well, we're now going to hear a video message from Minister Christian Schmidt. He's the German Federal Minister for Food and Agriculture, a member of the centre-right Christian Social Union Party, and he had former roles that included defence and development. So if all goes well, we shall now hear from Christian Schmidt.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident Wojciechowski, sehr geehrte Frau Direktorin Hammeleers, lieber Ministerkollege Martin van Dam, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren Abgeordnete, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen Minister, meine Damen und Herren. Schade, dass ich heute nicht bei Ihnen dabei sein kann, aber das ändert nichts an meinem Engagement für die wichtige Aufgabe, das Tierwohl in den Ställen zu verbessern. Ich bin sehr dankbar, dass Sie sich auf europäischer Ebene für einen Schulterschluss im Tierschutz einsetzen. Denn wir brauchen europaweit einheitliche Wettbewerbsbedingungen zum Wohl der Tiere. Es kann nicht sein, dass der eine Standard durch einen Einfachstandard anderswo ausgehebelt wird. Wir müssen zum Wohl der Tiere, aber auch gemeinsam in Europa den gestiegenen gesellschaftlichen Anforderungen und dem Tierschutz nachkommen. Ich freue mich als deutscher Minister, dass ich gemeinsam mit meinen niederländischen, dänischen und schwedischen Kollegen vorangehen durfte. Wir haben uns verpflichtet, unsere Bemühungen für mehr Tierschutz noch besser zu bündeln. Und das muss natürlich auch auf europäischer Ebene der Fall sein. Danke an die Kommission, dass sie bei der letzten Ratssitzung im Februar die nationalen Tierschutzpolitiken aufnehmen will in eine Tierschutzplattform, die europaweit Akzente setzt und die auch die Verpflichtungen für uns, gemeinsam in den wichtigen Fragen voranzugehen, unterstreicht. Wir haben in Deutschland das Erfolgsmodell freiwillige Verbindlichkeit mit der Branche entwickelt. Ich will neben gesetzlichen Regelungen damit auch über Selbstverpflichtungen der Branche, der gesamten Branche erreichen, dass sich die Tierschutzbedingungen verbessern. Wir fahren doch ganz gut mit diesem Modell. So haben wir gemeinsam mit der Geflügelbranche den Ausstieg aus dem Schnabelkürzen vereinbart. Und bei der Beendigung sind wir auch in intensiven Gesprächen mit den Schweineerzeugern. Darüber hinaus auch bei der Umsetzung unserer nationalen rechtlichen Vorschrift, dass ab 2019 das betäubungslose Kastrieren von Ferkeln nicht mehr erlaubt ist. Hier müssen wir neue Wege finden und hier müssen wir wohl auch noch forschen. Auch dieses ist ein Thema, das wir europäisch verstehen müssen und gemeinsam an solchen Fragestellungen und deren Lösungen arbeiten können. Ich bedanke mich bei Ihnen, dass Sie hierzu einen Beitrag leisten, und ich bedanke mich vor allem dafür, dass Sie in sehr konstruktiven Art und Weise diese Herausforderungen gemeinsam auch entwickeln wollen. Aber Tierhalter sind diejenigen, die hier gemeinsam ein Verständnis haben und entwickeln müssen. und nicht aus unterschiedlichen Kampfzonen aufeinander zugehen sollten. Das finde ich hier in Ihrer Diskussion gut wider und deswegen ist das ein Fortschritt für den europäischen Tierschutz. Herzlichen Dank.
After. So I'd now like to introduce to the floor a scientist, an expert, Dr. Hans Hopster, senior scientist in animal welfare at the Wageningen University. And he's done a lot of research in human and animal interactions. So I'd like to give you the floor. Before I do, I'd like to remind everyone of our Twitter hashtag, Act for Animals EU. So for those of you online, please get involved and let us know what you're thinking. But for now, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Hopster.
Thank you, Parliament Minister. You are Livestock Research, Hans Polder, Maria Scher, meeting on animal to behalf, which I do with great pleasure. Mutilations, physical interventions in animals, breaking the natural integrity of living tissue, are carried out throughout Europe for reasons of profitable and safe animal production and to compensate for husbandry systems that do not meet the needs of animals. Mutilations do not include surgical interventions to remedy health problems. Examples of mutilations are beak trimming in laying hens, tail docking in pigs and cattle, surgical casualties in the blink of an eye, but a major disadvantage for the animal is that these physical interventions are painful. Since we agreed in the Treaty of Lisbon that animals are sentient beings that feel pain, we should take full account of this notion and strive after minimizing painful mutilations. Those of you who are familiar with laboratory animal welfare will definitely recognize the 3 R's. Cattle instead of disbudding and dehorning. Second, develop less painful procedures and define innovative husbandry systems that no longer urge for this study was member states that stimulate phasing out mutilations and learn about the critical success factors. Our focus was on cattle, pigs, poultry, sheep and goats and horses. Policy officers of all 28 member states were asked for information on both legislative and non-legislative initiatives in their country by email, and 22 responded. Besides animal welfare, scientists and representatives from NGOs and farmers' organizations were asked for information on the non-legislative initiatives, first by email, followed by telephone interviews. The total of 47 people involved were equally distributed. 3 slides, I will give you an illustration of the results for cattle, pigs and poultry. To save time, I will not present the results for sheep and goats and horses. But of course, these are in the report as well. Here you find cattle. Let me first explain the layout of the slide. The y-axis presents the different mutilations in cattle. The x-axis presents the number of member states that have either less or more strict regulations compared to the recommendations of the Council of Europe. For cattle, as you might know, there is no Council directive on mutilations in force. These recommendations either allow direct no, that means, I'm sorry, I must say, either allow direct yes, or do not allow, that's the red one, rec no. Carried out of mutilations. Shaded green areas means less restrict, and shaded red areas means more applied because of human safety. Ear notching and branding appeared to be no common practice, although hot branding is banned out in several member states. Vasectomy, castration, disbudding and dehorning are deemed essential and part of a quality assurance scheme. Then we go to pigs. In contrast to cattle, for pigs a council directive including mutilations is in force. Teeth clipping and tail docking are new member states are more strict in banning these mutilations completely. Most member states agree on allowing chipping, vasectomy, castration and tattooing. At the same time, banning surgical castration in 2018. For ear notching and nose ringing, there is no legal pressure for a ban. In total, 42 non-legislative initiatives were found in 5 member states, banning castration, nose ringing, tail docking and teeth clipping. Again, mainly as part of quality. The situation is more complex. For broilers, for instance, there are neither recommendations nor a directive regarding mutilations. For laying hens, a directive is in force regulating beak trimming. Pinioning is banned anyway because no exception has been made for pinioning. Recommendations exist for detowing and dubbing, banned by several member states, in contrast to beak trimming and detowing. As far as pinioning is concerned, being less strict probably refers to non-compliant member states. I'm sorry. In total, 36 non-legislative initiatives were found in the assurance schemes. And then I come to my final. Successful examples were identified and lead to 6 general recommendations. First, there needs to be a sense of urgency to get the ball rolling. And that means that different parties should be involved. Agreed rules require enforcement. 3, technical solutions are required for technical problems. Safety nets are needed to reduce the risks. Finally, if legislation is unlikely to be successful, the market may help to make a change. This research has been established with the help of various parties. We are grateful for their support, but especially thank few weeks. Thank you for your attention.
How the importance of harmonisation, meeting the same level of welfare across the EU. I'd now like to invite Dr. Roman Collard to come to speak. He's a scientific advisor for Eurogroup for Animals, a board member since 2014. He's also a member of the management team of the German Animal Academy. And Dr. Collard is going to speak to us about the way forward. So, Dr. Collard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Forward. So, however, when we look at the various ways how to improve, and elsewhere, of course, there are various options how we can achieve that progress. And so, first of all, what I wanted to do here is to reflect on the options that we have available. Okay, even in the absence of the PowerPoint, I can continue, and let's hope that this will come up. So, of course, as you may think, and that's why we are here, and several speakers have pointed to it, the improvement of legislation, or the setting up of legislation governing the treatment of animals is, of course, the most effective way, both in terms of quality of the achievements, the potential quality, and the quantity, that is the number of animals that we reach through such measures. After all, when Eurogroup for Animals was founded some 30 years ago, it was under the slogan animal protection through legislation. Can you just turn it to the screen? Thank you. But we have to face it, and you all up or amend it, and this is difficult and time consuming. So another option that is used is to promote animal welfare friendly production systems through subsidies. But with EU-wide subsidies we may end up with the same problem as we had with legislation, and on the other hand national or regional initiatives in this field depend then, from an EU perspective, a heterogeneous landscape in that regard may not be desirable. We also look at voluntary subsidies, for example by retailers who, for example, pay farmers if they apply standards above the legal requirements, but these may not have that significant impact on the reality of animals' lives that we look for. For example, the present German initiative, the Retailers Initiative, allows farmers to pick out from a set of measures those that they want to apply. Which can lead to a situation that I cannot go into the details, but it has been branded by the, I think, quite understandable phrase of a single issue improvement, which is not what we are looking for. Furthermore, these approaches based on subsidies are not transparent to consumers normally. Brands or labels provided by retailers or producers are not transparent either, and often not well accepted by consumers as they are seen as so-called greenwashing. And therefore, I would like to draw a clear line between such brands and labels and transfer information to consumers, which I would like to focus on here. Such information can be provided through animal welfare labeling, which makes transparent to consumers if products are produced under higher animal welfare standards. And only in this way an informed purchase decision is possible, so that consumers can decide to pay more, to pay a higher price to compensate the higher production costs. And such purchase decisions, of course, in the end will influence the market and political actions. But oftentimes, the question is raised whether such type of animal welfare labeling is realistic or possible. So, on EU level, we have an example for this, because over a decade we have been able to make our experiences with the labeling of eggs by method of production. You all know the system, based on number categories indicating cage, hens, barn, eggs, free range and organic, 0, 3, 2, 1, 0. And if we look at the results, it is quite impressive in my point of view. An average of 59% of recognition rate for this egg scheme in the EU, a rise in the proportion of cage-free egg laying hens in Europe from 19.7 to 42.2%, and in my view this rise would be even higher if we would have had a labeling also for products derived from eggs or containing eggs. And if I look around in my own country, I proudly observe that nearly all German supermarkets do not offer eggs from caged hens anymore. To sum it up, labeling in the EU, that is, Group for Animals calls for mandatory methods of production labeling, following this example, for all meat and dairy products, measure assessments. As an interim solution, and only as an interim solution, we see voluntary labeling. But to prove that it is possible, several of Eurogroup's members have come up with labeling schemes that you can see on this slide. My own organization has come up with this label. In Germany, that's the Dutch label from Dierenbescherming, RSPCA in the UK, the Danish Society for the Speaking Country of Life, and farmers have been given the opportunity to invest in better welfare standards that have improved their ability to meet the demands of the consumers. The development of consumers. Thank you very much.
Farm organization high welfare products. And what is most important for farmers? Is it guidance, training, these labelling systems, financial incentives? What do you think is the most important for improving welfare among the farmers?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. But there's a lot of questions you reach in one spot. First, a reflection. Animal welfare, in the end, if you see a farmer as a person who's living with and from the animals, but also with the animals, then animal welfare is something that is, how shall I call it? It's a way of living, so there can't be one farmer against animal welfare. So that would be my first reflection. Second reflection is that, and I have heard a lot of, although I was a bit late, apologizes for this. But the second thing is, how can we make a real change so an international level playing field? And we see that with a lot of imports, it's quite common in the EU that you take other, let's say, animal welfare standards than what you would ask from your own farmers. And no matter from which country they come. That's very strange for me that from an European perspective we want higher animal welfare, and that from that perspective we don't demand the same questions to international farmers. That's strange. So that's one of the remarks I like to make at this moment as well. And that's one of the big challenges we as farmers now feel, that we all know that Europe is very strongly in debates like this. And we are very much challenged as European farmers in an international competition field. And we are now also in discussions with other countries like TTIP, etc., etc. And then we think that our standards will be the world standards. And if that would be, TTIP can't come fast enough. But one of the biggest challenges we have as EU is that within the EU we try to be one organization, but outside we are very often still many countries. So in discussion internationally, then it comes to power of EU, whether European animal welfare standards will become reachable goals for the world, or is it just still an internal challenge within the EU? So that's one of my first remarks I'd like to make.
And just a point on, you talked about trade, for example. Do you think that that raising the EU standards, it can become an added value for European products in the world? Europe can be seen as the place of the highest standards, especially when there are consumers looking
the extra income, a new impulse for a farmer to go faster, quicker, better? Well, I'm not convinced yet.
For finance that you think you could be getting, where do you think the Commission should be putting its emphasis on?
Animal welfare programs that are driven by an NGO, it's become so in the end farmers. So I'm not really giving an answer. I'm raising more questions, and that's very often if farmers come.
I think we're going to have to finish that. I'd like to obviously ask you some more questions, but I think we have to finish there. So thank you very much, Mr. Hubers, especially for your perspective from farmers. I'd now like to introduce to the floor MEP Maria Neuchel. She's a German member of the European Parliament's Socialist and Democrat group. I think it's now called the group's working group on animal transport. And you're going to look at the long-distance transport of livestock, something that has faced a lot of criticism in the EU. So the floor is yours.
Is this? Yes. No. Sorry. A warm welcome from me to you, and I have a short presentation for you. I think the topic is clear. The topic is we need fewer animal transport, and we need a shorter animal transport time in Europe. I try to give back 5 minutes. We are too late. We know the situation. 1 billion poultry and 37 million live cattle, pigs, sheep and horses and all are transported within the EU and 2/3 countries. We know the situation, the reality. There are very long distance, often thousands of kilometers. The journeys can last of several days. We know the reality, but the animals feel the reality every day. And for example, the situation of dehydration or so on, it's really a disaster. There is strong public support for limiting the transportation of live animals. Today and every day we have to fight for the 8-hour campaign. More than 1.1 million persons signed this paper in the EU, and I'm sure all animals would sign this paper. But these voices are not being heard. Since January 2007, we hope and we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait. And the situation for 360 million animals are not get better, which they transported in the EU in 1 year. The problem is the implementation by the member states. This is the problems, but there is still no legal maximum limit to journey times. The animal continue to suffer due to the poor conditions of their transportation. It is really a bad situation, you know. Why it's really necessary that the transport regulation #1 in 2005 is reserved. You see 5 points. The points are, I think you are all experts, you know the points. The political situation, the situation environmental, and so on. A short conclusion. We see the animal suffering. The transport of live animal is a public concern. The regulation #1, 2005, fall in protecting the welfare of the animal transported within EU as well as the third countries. We need it in this time. Now we need a revision of the transport regulation, and we need, this is the second part, we need a socio-economic impact assessment of the negative consequences of the long-distance transports. These both are really necessary. And the Eurogroup of Animal will start the transport campaign next week. Next week, you see the date in the slide, next week the campaign will be started. The campaign included the the same as one speaker before said, the replace for the transport of breeding animals, for example, by that of seams, or replace the transport of sliding animals instead of meat. You need the reducing and the refining situation. I think we have all together to do something that the transport time get shorter and the group of the animals who are in cars get fewer. It's not easy for me to speak English, it's easier to do it in German, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neuchel. We're now going to hear another video message, this time from Vytenis Andriukaitis. He's the European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, a Lithuanian former doctor. He's had the job since November 2014, and animal welfare is obviously a key part of his portfolio. So we're hopefully going to hear now from him. And with us in the room, I understand, is Michael Scannell from DG Santé in the European Commission. So afterwards, we can have a few questions and answers with yourself. So let's hear from Mr. Andriukaitis.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to have this opportunity to address this conference on animal welfare, even if I cannot be with you today in person. Last week in Strasbourg, I have received a little bunny plush with a message signed by a 12-year-old girl from Germany asking me to save the rabbits. This image gives a clear idea of the importance that European citizens attach to animal welfare and the expectation that they put on us, politicians, both at national and European level, to address this issue. This is the reason why, since the very beginning of my mandate 18 months ago, I have indicated the work on animal welfare as one of my personal priorities. I am confident in saying that, even if a lot needs still to be done, we have in the last months achieved some serious progress, in particular by pushing forward the implementation of the expired animal welfare strategy. Important studies like the one on the welfare of cats and dogs in commercial practices and the one on consumer information and education have been finalized. Two major reports on bovine and chickens have recently been concluded, and most importantly, the long-awaited guidelines on the welfare of pigs have been published together with a dedicated staff working document on the 8th of March. This is part of a larger program on animal welfare according to the plan defined with my services. It aims at concluding early next year all the actions of the strategy and at putting a serious focus on better implementation of the already existing rules. Looking at the future, we are about to publish in the next week the results of a specific Eurobarometer which, on the basis of the preliminary results, seems to confirm that for our fellow citizens, animal welfare is very important. Against this background, the idea of an European Union platform on animal welfare is certainly a very interesting one. It was proposed for the first time in 2014 by several agriculture ministers and then supported by the European Parliament in its declaration of November 2015. More recently, a position paper was prepared by the Dutch, German, Danish and Swedish ministers, which was discussed in the Agriculture and Fisheries Council last month. During the Council meeting, all Member States supported an enhanced stakeholder dialogue on animal welfare as a tool for better enforcement and exchange of good practices. Also, a large majority of Member States thought that a dedicated animal welfare platform could be a wise idea to find new ways to progress on animal welfare, even though some of them stressed that such a forum should not be a means to propose new legislation. Ministers also insisted, in particular, on the need to defend our high European Union animal welfare standards against unfair competition from non-European Union countries, especially in the present context where farmers face serious economic challenges. In addition, the Commission held on the 23rd and 24th February meetings to discuss and enhance stakeholder dialogue on animal welfare. The first day gathered together all stakeholders, including member states, while the second day was reserved for member state experts only. From these exchanges, it emerged that there is a broad consensus that a continuous stakeholder dialogue on animal welfare would bring European Union added value, and that the Commission has an important role to play in this regard. In particular, there is overall support for the Commission to serve as a facilitator between stakeholders, to exchange information on a diverse range of subjects, including enforcement, science, training, and international activities. This certainly represents a good basis towards the possible development of the idea of a dedicated platform. Many good ideas were presented by participants. The need for a better integration of animal welfare in our other activities was underlined, so that European Union animal welfare initiatives fit with other key European Union objectives, such as the fight against antimicrobial resistance, prevention of rabies, trade and investment policies. Many participants also favored specific expert groups like those established in the past by the Commission on animal transport, on castration, and on horses, for example. Some member states also presented constructive examples of their national initiatives on enforcement experiences, technological innovations, or integration of animal welfare with other sustainability issues, showing that they can bring benefits both for the animals and the producers. These meetings clearly demonstrated that many interesting initiatives are being taken by stakeholders and member states on animal welfare. They also confirm that the Commission is not, by a long way, the sole organization responsible for the quality of animal welfare in the EU. Indeed, one of the guiding principles of the EU animal welfare strategy adopted in 2012 was that everyone is responsible. Everyone includes all food business operators, farmers, transporters, slaughterhouses, retailers, right through to the final consumer, but also the member state authorities and civil society, including animal welfare organizations, scientists, and veterinarians. At this stage, the Commission is still evaluating which options are the most valuable as regards practical ways to address animal welfare issues. To sum up, animal welfare remains an issue of high importance for the Commission and for me personally. We are determined to identify positive and practical ways to further improve animal welfare in partnership with all those with an interest. The proposal for a dedicated European Union platform is certainly an interesting idea, which I am happy to discuss and explore. But I want to be clear. Any form of exchange, discussions, and actions can make a real impact only with a concrete commitment of all involved parties. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Andriukaitis. We're now going to have a few questions and answers with Michael Scannell. So I'd like to invite you to come up. He is, since the beginning of the year, he's taken over as Director of DG Santé's Directorate D. So that's for the food chain, stakeholder and international relations. And he served previously as Director at the Food and Veterinary Office, where he's responsible for ensuring compliance with EU requirements on food safety, animal and plant health. Just from my side, you've heard a lot of demands from everyone, better enforcement. There's the idea of an EU platform. We're looking ahead to the next EU Animal Welfare Strategy 2016 to 2020. There was the idea of an impact assessment, the socio-economic impacts of animal transport. Perhaps you can let us know your thoughts.
Thank you. I think the Commissioner himself gave a very forthright, honest and transparent account of his position on animal welfare and its importance to him personally. And he's very sincere in that, and he's very exigeant, as the French say, with his own services in pressing for a very ambitious agenda on animal welfare. And certainly we're taking that very, very seriously in the DG Santé services. But I think it's important also that we, let's say, look at this in a very broad perspective and recall some of the real successes that have taken place in relation to animal welfare, which provide a very good platform for future action. And I think it's widely acknowledged that Europe does have the highest animal welfare standards in the world. And I noted, and I will be reporting this to the Commissioner, that a good number of you essentially were of the view that this progress has stalled in recent years and that it needs a new impetus to take us, let's say, to move forward. But significant progress. And again, in my former job, the audits carried out in the Food and Veterinary Office, we saw excellent progress in certain member states, and I take the example of the Netherlands, for example, which has a huge trade in live animals, but the progress that took place there in recent years was genuinely extremely impressive. And one of the real lessons from that was how there was full engagement by all the relevant actors, because sometimes we make the mistake of seeing this. It's only the legislator has a role in relation to higher animal welfare standards. But where we see real successes is where all the relevant parties are fully engaged. And that includes the farmers, the transporters, the regulators, the police authorities, judicial authorities. And we saw excellent examples of that in the Netherlands. And on a personal note, you know, I'm always thinking about work, from the shower in the morning to, in this case, travelling on the autoroutes. And over the years, I've seen a huge improvement in the standard of animal transporters. Some of these vehicles now are of an extremely high standard, cost an awful lot of money, they're big investments on behalf of the operators. So I think it would be somewhat of a mistake to get engaged in this somewhat, let's say, polemical debate on an 8-hour limit. Using these very high standard transporters, animals can be transported in excellent conditions for longer than 8 hours. And the experience of my inspectors in my former job when working on the ground is that very often they see worse conditions, frankly, within member states on much shorter journeys, for example, on very bad roads in very bad transporters, but which are fully compliant with the actual time limits. So we shouldn't, as I say, make the mistake of using only one measure to evaluate yes or no whether measures work or not. Or other areas where we've seen very big improvements, the legislation on slaughter of animals. A recent audit series looked at the level of compliance in member states, and again the results were very, very encouraging. And the legislation itself has not become fully operational only for the last couple of years, but already a very good level of engagement by operators. They're investing in the necessary resources, they're training their staff, they're working with official authorities, and again the experience we had with transport, the best results we see are in areas where all the relevant parties combine together. On the international front, the Commission now, as a matter of policy, is insisting in any new free trade negotiations, we insist on the inclusion of an animal welfare chapter. We're very, let's say, conscious of the insistence and demands of our own producers for a level playing field in this area. And yes, it is a very, very difficult issue, as our colleague from Copa-Cogeca remarked, that essentially our own producers on the ground need to be convinced that their best interests are being promoted at an international level. And that's an area we're committed to working much, much better. Now, I could speak, and it's not my purpose, only to speak of, let's say, the areas where things are working. I think it's also important that I speak on where things can be and should be improved. So, for example, the Commission currently is working on a new strategy on antimicrobial resistance, and our Commissioner has made this one of the flagship events of his term of office. He wants to see real action taking place both at EU level and at international level to reduce the threat from antimicrobial resistance. And interestingly, from an animal welfare perspective, high animal welfare standards have a key role to play in tackling antimicrobial resistance. So across a number of fronts in the Commission, in DG Santé, we're currently working on how we can learn on the experience of those member states that have low usage of antibiotics, because our suspicion, it's more than a suspicion, but our gut instincts tell us that one of the factors that allow them to use much lower levels is that they have very good animal husbandry standards and very good animal welfare standards. And if our instincts, our knowledge is confirmed by this series of audits, that will provide a new impetus to press on the, let's say, the non-compliant, or say the less compliant member states to do more on animal welfare, because not only is that good for the animals, but it will also contribute to lower levels of antibiotic use and better defences against antimicrobial resistance. Now, again, looking forward, a lot of you have remarked on, let's say, the lack of legislative initiatives. But you don't necessarily need legislative initiatives to make progress. So there are a number of concrete examples. For example, on dairy cows. In DG Santé, we have recently started a number of audits looking at how member states are doing in relation to compliance with the Council of Europe requirements on dairy cows. We don't need an actual piece of EU legislation in that respect. And this is going to be very important because, as you're all aware, milk quotas were recently abolished, and notwithstanding the current situation on the market for products, milk and milk products, the expectation is that milk production will increase substantially over the next several years, and that has clear animal welfare implications. So we want to see how member states are preparing for the likelihood that milk production will increase, and how they're going to reconcile that with the need to ensure that there are very high animal welfare standards. Similarly, on tail docking of pigs, it would be quite easy for the Commission to carry out audits, for example, in those member states where there is low levels of compliance, but that would only confirm something we already know. Our focus instead is to look at those member states that are already doing the job right, so that we can learn from what they're doing right and disseminate that information to those member states that need to do an awful lot better. So an awful lot of training, an awful lot of audits have taken place on exactly this dimension, where we bring together experts from the member states, bring them to a member state where it's been done right, and then require them to report to us on how they put the lessons learned into practice in their own member states. The Commissioner spoke about ensuring that all stakeholders are fully committed to making progress, because frankly we have to avoid polemical debates. Sometimes it's comforting to have a heroic defeat. We're more interested in making real constructive progress. And one of the more encouraging areas in that respect in recent years is the public pressures for higher standards, which are feeding through to a much higher level of demands by the retail chain and private operators for higher animal welfare standards. Last week, I was at 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference of the Global Food Safety Initiative in Berlin, a huge event. Over 1,000 delegates paying very large amounts of money to be there. But one of the striking features of the very many presentations was the huge importance being placed by retailers on higher animal welfare standards. And all the big retailers, all the big producers were there, and it was striking just how conscious they are on consumers' and citizens' demands for higher welfare standards. And that is obviously having its ripple effect through the entire production chain, and the Commission will be working hard to ensure that that practice continues. I'll stop there for the moment, but I could happily continue for another half an hour, both on the successes that have taken place and the real potential there is for further improvements.
Perhaps I can widen it out now and ask if I saw a hand go up over here, so a question or a comment from the floor, yes. And please press the button on the microphone because we're on the live stream. Thank you very much.
Ja, thank you first. I want to say some words with Commissioner Andriukaitis, nice conversation about this problem, and I told him rabbits are the second most species in the EU, with over 326 million animals slaughtered for meat every year, and most are kept in barren environments, in the so-called battery cages, and they suffer extremely. Currently, there are no species-specific legislation protecting the welfare of the farmed rabbits in the EU, and this is, in my eyes, a real big scandal. We can have here very nice speeches, but on the end, if there are no results coming for animal welfare increasement, it not helps. I want not listen to nice speeches, I want to see results, and I believe that outside the citizen in Europe, it was mentioned here before, there is a high demand for increasing animal welfare standards in the EU. And one word more, I'm observing the trend that for this Commission, under Mr. Juncker and Mr. Timmermans, animal welfare range way beyond any other business. So we not need words, we like to see results. The time of speeches should end. Results must be on the table, and we can measure this. If we see during the next 3 years new animal welfare legislation, if there is the Commission not coming up with new legislation, then it's only nice words, but nothing behind it. That's my mind. New legislation we want to see. Thank you.
Perhaps I can take maybe 3 comments. So, yes, Mr. Taylor, we can have.
Hello. Thank you. I'm sorry, Andy. I've only just finished writing it. Look, spreading good practice is only one activity of the Commission. And I'm rather confounded by your seeming inability to set and implement the regulations that already exist. You seem to be offering us a way forward which is merely spreading good practice. I'd like to see a more robust action from the Commission, because I think you're failing the will of the majority of citizens who we've heard actually do care about animals. I'd like to see really some concrete action. Like Stefan, I'd like to see some concrete action actually coming from the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
It's a difficult system. Thank you. I'm wondering, we heard from several ministers really ambitious plans and activities which they think is necessary for animal welfare in Europe. And from the Commission part, I hear also words, a lot of words, and no real activities. And I think there's a big gap between the ambitions of the member states and the ministers we heard and the reality of the work the European Commission is willing to do. And I'm wondering, how does the reorganization of your own DG stands in this situation? Because there was a reorganization in the Animal Welfare Department, which is now called Animal Welfare Section, I believe. How do you close the gap between what the member states want and what the Commission is capable of doing?
Thanks very much. Perhaps I can now ask Mr. Scannell to respond.
Okay, well...
we have Just one more comment. If you can keep it brief, and then I'll let Mr. Scannell.
Thank you very much. Ik stel mijn vraag in het Nederlands. Heb ik afgesproken met onze minister Van Dam uit Nederland. Hij gaat dadelijk mijn vraag vertalen. Want dan weet ik dat het ook gewoon goed vertaald is. Want daar ontbreekt het hier nog wel eens aan. Wij hebben een groot probleem. In Nederland, ik kijk naar Frans Huibers, naar de overkant. Hebben wij gigantisch geïnvesteerd in dierenwelzijn en in milieu. De boeren hebben daar allemaal aan meegedaan. Maar de helft van de boerenbedrijven in varkenshouderij en de anderen gaan eraan, die gaan failliet. Omdat we de concurrentiepositie niet aankunnen. Als het gaat over concurrentie met Duitsland, hebben wij in Nederland 2/3 deel hogere kostprijs als in Duitsland. Heb ik het nog niet over de andere landen. En dan is mijn concrete vraag aan onze minister uit Nederland. En ik ben blij dat u voorzitter bent, nu ook in Europa. U bent voor boeren, familie, gezinsbedrijven, zoals ook Copa Cogeca. Hoe gaan wij daarmee om? We spreken hier over animal welzijn, over de dierenwelzijn. Maar ik spreek ook over boeren, familie, gezinsbedrijven welzijn. Sociaal-economisch platteland. Als het zo doorgaat, en dan kijk ik naar de uitbreiding Rusland, wat daar allemaal gebeurt. Ik kijk naar China, wat daar gebeurt. Alle landen om Europa heen, buitengrenzen, die gigantisch uitbreiden. Kijk ik naar Oekraïne. Voordat die zo ver zijn, wat we hier in Nederland al doen, en dus de eerste stappen wat wij hier zijn, dan zijn er geen boeren, familie, gezinsbedrijven meer over, maar dan is het puur industrie. En misschien zegt u, dat zegt mevrouw Schreier-Pierik Annie, maar dat was ook precies gisteren wat Jan Douwen van de ploeg vanuit Wageningen gisteren vertegenwoordigde.
Thanks very much.
Dus ja, thank you very much, maar het is wel een belangrijke vraag. Hoe gaan we hier verder?
We don't have much time now for Mr. Scannell to respond. Perhaps Minister Van Dam afterwards we could have a couple of words in response. But I think without the I'd like to ask Mr. Scannell to respond to, I think you had 3 questions there, particularly on what the Commission is doing. You heard lots from ministers about demands to move forward. There's the impression that we're static here. What can you say?
Yeah. Yes, and I think I explicitly acknowledged that the member states concerned, the member states behind this particular, or most supportive of this particular initiative, have an excellent track record on animal welfare issues, which we have been trying to, let's say, learn from the European Commission to drive others to have an equal level of ambition. But we have to accept that this is the vanguard of pressure for more action on animal welfare. So when we hear, and we do, demands for more legislation, we have to keep in mind frankly, let's say, the lack of support there is in a great many quarters for more legislation in this area. You know, I remember very distinctly the extraordinarily difficult negotiations on the animal transport regulation, which was a hugely divisive issue in both the Agriculture Council and indeed in the European Parliament. And it caused a lot of bitterness and difficulties at the time and caused some very serious divisions. And you know, we have to ask ourselves, would we have a similar experience if and when we bring forward new legislative initiatives? Because I don't think it would be very helpful or conducive to our overall effectiveness if we repeat those, let's say, those barriers and those divisions. Because ultimately we have to move together and with a broad body of support. And there's an awful lot we can do. I give a very brief summary of some of the existing actions that can already be undertaken within the existing legislation to raise standards in a number of key areas, and I think we have to continue in that respect. So, in relation to the second question, where let's say the claim is that we haven't any evidence of real action being taken, that it's all about just cooperation. Sorry, I make no apology for highlighting the need and importance for good cooperation. You know, we can all engage in a very adversarial, let's say, course of action. We can bring lots of member states to the European Court of Justice and take the risk that we might lose. We can launch lots of more legislative initiatives and again cause real divisions. We're more interested in seeing concrete on the ground progress. And if cooperation and guidelines help that, we'll do it and we'll make no apology for it. But similarly, as I highlighted earlier, we have never been afraid to take strong action to get member states to respect their obligations. And I gave the specific examples of what we did on battery cages for hens and sow stalls. And I'm repeating myself, and I don't want to be wasting your time in this respect, but we took very strong enforcement action to get member states to meet their requirements. We've also taken very strong action at an international level to make our trading partners aware of our, let's say, our insistence and commitment to very high welfare standards, including in the area of trade, even though we don't have a very strong legal base to do so. And I don't want to start another debate, but the World Trade Organization provisions on animal welfare are, by any measure, relatively weak. But again, when people speak of evidence of actions, that didn't stop us recently, as an example, on banning imports of horse meat from Mexico, which was a very controversial and difficult issue. We did it on the grounds of food safety. And again, I'd highlight that as another course of action. The Commission experience in this area is you have to have a very holistic approach towards animal welfare. And I give the example of antimicrobial resistance, where you can make real progress on a key public health issue while also promoting good husbandry and high animal welfare standards. Similarly, in the area of hygiene, our experience increasingly is, and this bears out the remarks of our colleague from Copa-Cogeca, good producers are good, full stop. They have very good animal welfare standards, they have very good animal husbandry standards, they have very good hygiene standards. And again, it's not an accident that the best standards we see in the area of animal welfare are in those member states with, let's say, the highest levels of efficiency in agricultural production generally. Because you're either good or you aren't. And we want to promote the good ones and encourage the ones that are not so good to basically up their performance and do their job an awful lot better. And then finally, the reorganisation of within DG Santé itself. Well, my own presence here is, let's say, one aspect of it. We have created a new international directorate to give ourselves a more forceful presence in relation to the negotiation of sanitary and phytosanitary issues at international level, and that includes animal welfare issues. And in relation to the animal welfare unit, and again it bears out my remarks about having a holistic approach, it's essentially being combined with animal health, because we can leverage both, and again I give the example of antimicrobial resistance, to get a better overall outcome. So this reorganisation is entirely compatible and supports our Commissioner's priority on animal welfare. And if I may, I just briefly return to the very first question on species-specific legislation. I think our Commissioner's opening remarks, where he acknowledged, let's say, the very strong pressures he has received personally on this issue, you know, he's very conscious of the need for actions on specific species, but we can't ignore what I said earlier in terms of, let's say, the limitations on legislative initiatives in general, and the need, frankly, not to have a one-instrument-only approach towards animal welfare. You know, legislation has a key role to play, but it's not the only role, and we have to press all the buttons.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Scannell, for that response to all those questions. Perhaps we still have time for a bit more input, so does anyone have another question? Perhaps those who haven't spoken already, a question or a comment for the floor? Yes. Okay, if you could reply briefly to the comment.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. And I promised I need to translate what Annie Schreier asked. She said, I think animal welfare is very important, right? But also the welfare of the farmers is very important, and they face huge competition. That was her question. And I know Annie already for a long time. We've been in Parliament together, and she has always been very passionate about this issue. And I would like to say it would be great if you would if you would use your passion also to stimulate farmers and to support them in the investments they make for animal welfare. Because actually there was one small misunderstanding maybe in your speech, because you just said that investing in animal welfare leads to a weaker position in the market. Actually, the reality right now in the Netherlands is that pig meat farmers who have invested in animal welfare have a much stronger position in the market during the current market crisis than the ones who didn't. The ones who are being certified with 1, 2 or 3 stars by the Dutch Society for Animal Protection now have less problems with the market situations than the one who didn't do so. Actually, the current crisis is not a crisis that's caused by investing in animal welfare. It's being caused by overproduction. And that's what our Dutch pig meat sector says itself. It has been for years the only way to have a stronger market position was to invest in a larger scale of production. Because with a larger scale of production you could reduce costs and with that you could strengthen your market position. Actually, that's what a lot of Dutch pig meat farmers have done. Right now the pig meat sector itself is an initiative. They put up a commission in the Netherlands. They say we want to come out of this difficult market situation, and we think we have to reform the way we are doing business. They want to compete more on quality, more on animal welfare, and more on sustainability. I think they're in the right direction, and I think they need both our support. So it would be, I think it would be very helpful if we could, you and I would both support this development in the sector itself, because it's a very important step they're taking. And I think they can be an example for the rest of Europe, because right now the pig meat sector everywhere in Europe is in a market crisis. And we won't come out of this market crisis if we continue to produce in the way we're doing, because we're all facing overproduction right now. In the whole of Europe, and well, we cannot just hope that the Russian Federation will open its borders again. Probably it won't happen in a short time, but I think there's a structural problem in the market. So the investments that are being made, I think they're very important, and I think that's the future of food production in Europe as well, with more attention to sustainability, more attention to animal welfare. It gives us a better market position in the world market. What is important is that we have the whole of Europe take steps like this. Because if we don't, I think Hans also mentioned it, you don't have a real level playing field, and so you're being competed. Dutch farmers who have invested in animal welfare are being competed by other member states that haven't. And what I also mentioned in my speech is that we have to be very careful with trade agreements, because we shouldn't open up our borders and remove tariff barriers for products that are being made in countries where they don't have the same animal welfare standards as we do, because it could be well, let's call it false competition for European farmers who are investing in animal welfare if in the same market there are products that are being produced to much lower standards. So that was in my speech as well. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Van Dam. We have time for one more question. There's on the left there. Yes, yourself.
Oh, okay, fine. Yes, my name is Michel van den Bos. I'm the president of the Belgian animal rights organization, welfare organization Gaia. And I would like to commend Mr. Van Dam. I think your analysis was extremely interesting. What I should like to hear, and you said that, I don't know what your name is, the Dutch person, yes, you, that, oh yeah, right, that farmers' welfare is very important. I think that the welfare of each and every sentient being is important, and as farmers, all farmers are sentient beings, as all humans are. I think that the welfare of each and every human as well as animal, being sentient beings, is important. Now, what I would like to hear is, instead of hearing farmers always talking about threats, what I don't hear is, and that is my question, when will farmers come up and do some thinking about solutions? I would like to hear farmers and farmers' organizations coming up with reasoning in terms of opportunities. I think that animal welfare is providing opportunities, like Minister Van Dam was explaining. For several times you are always hearing from certain farmers' organizations that piglets do not feel pain when they are being castrated. It's not an important issue, it is not an important question. Now, I'm very sorry, but I think that farmers' welfare is very important, and that when we come up with solutions, we should try to think about the possibility of farmers, I would say, applying some form of farming that is compatible with animal welfare, with sustainability, as Minister Van Dam was explaining. I think that is important, but I would like to hear, and I would like to see farmers' organizations coming up with solutions that are really complying with citizens in Europe, and consumers are feeling that that is very important. I mean the welfare of animals. It's too easy to always talking about threats and complaints and always complaining. I would like to hear and see also farmers coming up with solutions, and preferably the right solutions. Solutions that will make a future again for each and every sentient beings, be they farmers, humans or animals, whatever. Thank you.
So thanks very much for that important contribution. I think we're out of time to continue the conversation afterwards, and also interviews with the media. I'd like to now make a few concluding remarks of points that I've picked up, so I'll do that now from the podium. So first of all, a big thank you to all of our speakers today, and thank you again to Eurogroup for Animals for organising this really important event. We've heard a number of key points which I've been writing down, that were central to the joint declaration of the ministers, which we've heard a lot about. Now, these have included stricter enforcement of current rules, and that's only fair, of course, for those that have already implemented the rule. We've heard that that needs to be done, and ensure that that the EU rules in general are credible and properly enforced. And we've heard that there are gaps in areas such as animal transport, docking of pigtails, pig welfare. There was a call to look at other species, like rabbits, and there were pets, for example. We heard about an EU platform that would be an important forum where these issues could be discussed, and that's something that's already been supported by agriculture ministers in the Agriculture Council in Brussels. That was last month. It's important that there's an exchange of best practices on EU animal welfare, so that we can learn from one another's experiences. That's where guidelines are so important for the best implementation of the rules. We heard about the role of research to ensure that the legislation meets the latest findings in science. We've heard about animal-based welfare indicators, for example. And then, of course, we're now looking ahead to the Animal Welfare Strategy 2016 to 2020. There's still gaps in implementing the current strategy, but we heard that there's an urgency to move forward now with the priorities of the next years. We heard also about an upcoming Eurobarometer. That's going to be very interesting reading, but I'm informed that it's going to show a clear support among European citizens for strong standards at EU level. So there's backing from the public, who are increasingly concerned about where their food is coming from, how it's produced. We also heard how animal welfare is increasingly tied up with human health, in terms of use of antibiotics, growing resistance of infections to antibiotics, the spread of certain diseases. So it's an issue that concerns everyone, and clearly healthy animals means healthy products and healthy humans. So it's important that the EU doesn't go backwards, keeps its standards high, and that's something that the EU should be proud of, and its products should be promoted in this way. Also, there's the need for higher welfare to bring higher value to farmers. We heard this from the representative of the farm organisation. There needs to be support for this. Labelling, we heard, is one initiative that can do this. So these are some of the issues. We raised a lot of different points ahead of the EU's next strategy on animal welfare. But for myself, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the speakers and to the ministers for being present for this important debate. There's now time for some media interviews. For those who are travelling out of Brussels, have a safe onward journey. And for those of you who are staying here, a successful day. And thank you very much, and goodbye from myself.